All right, we're going to start this out drawing orthographic number 6, which is the Sawhorse. Hopefully we're going to be able to see a lot of these components. This is going to be tricky for me because I like to draw light and then darken after, but I'm afraid you won't be able to see a lot of the lines. So I'm going to have to do a lot of this with my 2H right from the get-go, which will be tricky. My end goal here is hopefully that you can see the lines. All right, so first step, just like always, we're going to draw in the outline of our rectangles for our shapes. So on the instructions, first thing, again, everything here is done 1.5 inch equals a foot scale. Okay. The first step here is to leave 2 foot 4.5 inches from the left page border. So that means from the left page border, I'm going to measure in 2 feet 4.5 inches and draw myself a parallel line. So I set this up to 4.5 inches and mark 2 feet because it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The 1 and the 2 is for the 3-inch scale on the other side. So now that I have that mark, I can grab my square lined up with my straight edge, and I'm just going to mark that vertical line. Okay, so you can see that. Now I need to offset the width of the Sawhorse. So we're considering this here the front, and this here is going to be the side or end view. And then of course looking from the top down here will be the top view. So first we need to draw the width of this front view. So how wide is this front view? I know it's zoomed out a bit, but right here it has 3'6". So for the width of this, I'm going to set the ruler up on a 1.5 inch scale to 6 and then mark 3. Okay, so that's 6 inches and then 1, 2, 3 feet. So now I can draw that. Another nice straight line all the way up. Again, I'm going to erase the extra after, so it's no big deal. Now on the instructions, it says that I want to leave 1 foot, right, between the views. So I simply just measured 1 foot. And draw that line. Now, I'm not going to draw this line all the way up because I know this is only the front view and it only has a particular height, so go about half. Now I need to offset the width of the Sawhorse, and I already said that the end of the Sawhorse is this side view, and it says right there 1 foot 5.25. So I set this up to 5.25, and I measure off 1 foot. And I draw myself a last vertical line. Now, if my measurements are done correctly, the last space over here should be close to this. It doesn't work out perfect, but it's really close. It should be about 2 feet 4.25. So I put this up to 2 feet, and I'm just shy of 2 feet 4.25 there. So we're good. The math all works out across the page. Now we got to draw our rectangles, or complete the rectangles from going up from the bottom of the page. So down here is my bottom border, and on the instructions it says to leave 8.5 inches from this bottom border. So I set my ruler on 8.5 inches. Make a mark, and then I can draw that horizontal line. So this here, I'm just going to mark a horizontal line in the 2 object views. So this one here is going to end up being my front view, and this one here is going to end up being the side view or the end view of my workbench, right? My Sawhorse. So I'm only drawing a line from here to here and another line from here to here. Okay, that's just completing the bottom of these views. I could draw it right across, but I just have to erase it after. Okay, and then lastly here, I now want to offset these front views up. Right, so how tall is the Sawhorse? Well, looking at this drawing here, I'm going to fold the top down here just so I can lift it up easier. You can see the height of it is 1 foot 2 plus 1 foot 4, which equals 2 foot 6. So if I measure up 2 foot 6, mark at 2 feet, put it on 6 inches. And now that I have that, I can draw that same line across and another one across on the end view. So now I have my 2 rectangles for the front and side view all drawn out. Okay, now I can continue on and do the top view. But I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to leave that alone. And when I'm done this view, I'm actually going to transfer these lines up using the miter method and then across to actually produce this top view. So this top view will be completely produced by these two views. So first, I'm just going to focus on these two views. So I'm going to adjust my camera to try and get closer in so we can actually see what I'm doing in only these two views. And then we'll zoom back out to begin the transfer over to the top drawing. Okay, so we're a little bit closer there. First thing I'm going to do to get started here is I'm actually going to erase some of the extra stuff here, just right off the bat, just so I have my rectangles, because that's really all I want. So I'm just going to start by erasing some of these extra lines here. Just so I view only the rectangles I want to view, just to kind of avoid myself making a mistake or going to a line I don't want to go to. All right. So just a little bit extra erasing there. There. Okay, it's good enough for now. I can clean it up finally later. Now you can see I just have my two rectangles. I have the big rectangle here, which is my front view that we've decided, and this here is my end view. Now, of course, when you're drawing orthographics, you get to choose which view is what, right? Here I've told you to choose which is the end and which is the front view. So there's no real deciding factor other than making a choice. Okay, so to start this, I like to kind of start with the top and then kind of work down. The top component is nice and easy. Now on this here, the front view here is going to consist of the top piece being the first, being this top piece here, which is labeled 1, and the dimensions of that piece there are 1.5 by 1 3/4 by 3.5. Now there's two dimensions on this, and visually from this drawing you should be able to see which dimension's what. So we know that this top piece is much wider, so that's going to be our 3.5, and then we have this bit here which is going to be our 1 3/4. Now looking in the front view here in this way, you're not going to see the 3.5. That's going to be in the top view. You're only going to see the side. So first up, I'm going to draw a line 1 3/4 down to get that top piece in. So I set my scale ruler up, make sure I'm on 1.5 inch equals a foot. And I'm just going to mark 1 3/4 inch. Okay, there's my 1 3/4. I slide the straight edge up. There's my 1 3/4. And I draw a line across. And I'm also going to draw a little line over here in this view at the same time. That way I know I don't have to readjust my ruler to get this to fit. So I'm drawing this same line here because I know in the end view, when I'm looking at this end view here, I'm going to see just the butt end of this piece of wood up here. So I know that there's going to be a bottom line there that's also 1 3/4 away from the top line. Okay, so I just kind of drew in that. I'm going to refocus here a second. I just kind of drew in this top line here just to make up for that top piece, and we'll figure that out in a bit. So now that I have the top piece marked out, my next step is I want to draw in the legs. So you can see the legs coming down here, right? And the size of the legs would refer to number 2. So if I look at number 2 here, I can see that the legs are 3/4 inch by 3.5 inches. So you have to decide in this view, which dimension am I going to see? Well, I'll just look at this leg down here. Obviously, we can see that this dimension here is much longer or wider than this dimension here, which means this is going to be the 3/4, and this here is going to be the 3.5. And looking at our views, when I look at the front view, I'm seeing the 3.5 side, so I know that I'm going to draw my legs at 3.5 inches wide. But now we have to look. You can see that the legs don't start at the outside of the piece on either end, so we need to know what dimension that comes in. You can see on the drawing here, I have 5 inches marked. So from the edge of my piece, if I mark in 5 inches, that's the starting point, but then it's going to come down right to the corner of my rectangular box that I have, because that's the corner of my 3'6". Okay, so what I'm going to do here is measure in 5 inches from each end, and then connect that line down to the corner. So I set up my ruler here, and it's from the very top. All right, so I set up my ruler at 5 inches. I put a mark. Then I come over to this side, and I also put my ruler on 0, and I mark 5 inches. So I've marked 5 inches in on each side, and now what I want to do is just grab my straight edge and connect that down to the very corner of that rectangle, right? So I connect that right down to the corner. I come over to this side, and I do the same thing. And I'm not worried about hidden lines at this point. When we do our cleanup phase, we'll come back and do that. So I connect that down to the very corner, and that is now my legs inset in. Now I want to offset the thickness of these legs, and all I have to do that, we just do a parallel line. So we basically make 2 dots because we don't have an angle. None of our squares work at that angle that's provided here. So we can't do that. We have to just use a parallel line offset. So to do this, it's such a small scale, it's not going to matter. If you just guess, right, close to 90 degrees, so you just visualize a 90 degree here, I can mark off 3.5 inches, right? If you want to be really, really finicky, you could line this up, right? Take your square and line it up with that line, and then we could use this, right, to set that square to line up that edge to get a true 3.5 inches, which works as well. Right, so I'm going to mark at 3.5 inches, but I'm not going to do that for every one, although you can. So I'm going to come down here and roughly mark parallel and mark another 3.5 inches. And I'll just do this one first. So now what I do is I set my pencil on the first 3.5. I offset the bottom one, so now I have parallel lines, and I can trace that one right down to the bottom, which gives me a 3.5 inch offset. So I'm going to do the same on the other side. I set it up at 3.5. I mark parallel, another 3.5. I mark parallel. I grab my line, set it on the first dot, line up the second one, and then when I'm good, I draw down. And now I have my 3.5 inch offset on each piece. Okay, so I've already drawn in the top of this and I've drawn in the legs. The next thing that I like to do here is draw in the center line in both of these views, because if I look at the front view here, this side rail piece here, the bottom of it lines up with the plywood at the end, the gusset at the end of our sawhorse. So basically this line right here, all the way across this view, is also in line with this bottom of plywood here. So that's going to be my starting point for all the middle section of this drawing. And you can see here that that line is up 1 foot 2 inches. So in the bottom of my thing here, I measure up 1 foot 2, right? Make a mark, and then using my straight edge, now I can draw a line right across the middle of this one. And just for the sake of it, I'm also going to draw my line right across the middle of this one. So now I have that middle line here. Okay, and that's the kind of the midpoint of the tray, and also the plywood gusset on the end of our workbench or our sawhorse. So now what I'm going to do is, before I start transferring any more values to kind of build this in, I want to get the end view caught up to this one, right? So that means I want to complete the top of this, and then I also want to draw in the legs. Okay. And this is a bit tricky. There is one point here where we have to kind of guesstimate our best guess, but it still works out because the scale is so small. So what we're going to do here is, we know that this is 1 foot 5.25 inches, right? But what I want to do here is I want to make sure that the center, or this top piece here, is perfectly centered, right? Because that's what it's going to be, given this dimension here and these legs both angle up at the same angle. Then that means that this piece here must be centered in our view. So what I need to do first is take this 1 foot 5.25, and I need to split it. I need to break it down into half. So when I do that, I just think of it, each item as its own. What's half of a foot? Well, that's 6 inches. What's half of 5 inches? That is 2.5 inches. So what's 6 plus 2.5? That's 8.5 inches. And then we have the quarter, half of that is 1/8. So now we have 8.5 feet plus another 1/8, so that's 8 5/8. Now our scale only goes to 1/2 inches, right? So the quick, easy way to do this is, if I now just take my tape, or my straight edge here, my ruler, and I mark over 8.5 inches, and I put a mark, right? So I mark exactly 8.5 inches. And then I just come to this side and I mark over the same 8.5 inches. That should give you 2 marks, right? Well, we know that right in the center of those 2 marks is going to be center of this drawing, right? Because I measured 8.5 and 8.5. So whatever the balance is in the center there has to be the midpoint. So I'm just going to double check my numbers there. That's 8.5. That was not quite 8.5. I'm just gonna, oh, it's pretty close, right? 8.5, so I know the midpoint is gonna be right in the middle of those two. So that now vertical little tick there is now my midpoint. Now I also know that the top of this piece has 2 dimensions associated with it, according to our isometric drawing here. So holding this here, we know that it's 1 is pointing to the top piece, and we can see the top is 1 3/4 by 3.5. So, right, so we know the 1 3/4 is this width here, which is also the width here, which means that the dimension this way is going to be 3.5 inches. So now that I have the center point marked, I can now just offset half of 3.5 on each side of that center, and that will put that top piece perfectly centered. And we should all be familiar at this point that half of 3.5 is 1 3/4, because we've worked a lot with framing, right? So if I mark 1 3/4, and all I'm doing here is I set my ruler up so one side is at 1 3/4, and I mark 0. Oops, a little off there. And the other side, I just mark 3.5, right? Because that's going to be another 1 3/4 on top of that piece. So now I have my 3.5 inches marked, and I can draw in the vertical lines here. So I draw that one in, and I come over here and draw that one in. Okay, so now I have this top piece, which is 3.5 inches. So just for right now, I'm just going to erase a bunch of those marks because I have more marks to put up there. So all I do is I give a quick erase just to get rid of a lot of those marks, because I have other lines that I can use to help fill that back in. And by that I mean I can come up here and just kind of redraw in that line, and now I have my square. I can also just very quickly, because I'm going to come back and darken all this later, so I can just kind of erase the end points of that just to leave that little rectangle, which is going to be the top piece there. Okay, so now I got to do the legs, and this is a bit of the tricky part. Again, we know the legs from our drawing, number 2, and number 2 is 3/4 by 3.5, and in our front view, we know that this is the 3.5 view, so that means over here is going to be the other dimension. It's going to be the 3/4 of an inch. But where do we start? Well, we have to start right up here, because right up here, we're actually going to mortise in the leg. I know it's hard to kind of see on this drawing, but if you look really, really, really close at this point right here, or any of them, you can see that the leg is kind of sitting in the middle of this line here, which means that this leg is actually mortised in the top piece a little bit on the top side here. Well, like I gave you that dimension right here. So 3/8 of an inch is what this is going to sit in. So it's going to be a little mortise in the top here, 3/8 of an inch. So when I look at my end view, looking this way, I have to offset that top corner of the leg in 3/8 of an inch. So what I do is from the very top point right here, I want to measure 3/8 of an inch, which is going to be just under 1/2 inch, right? In between 1/2 and 1/4 exactly. So I measure that in 3/8 of an inch, and I put a tick there. Then I come over to this side and I make that same mark. So 3/8 in. Okay, so now I have the 2 ticks, one there and one there, that are just about 3/8 of an inch in from the edge of this top piece. So that's going to allow me to mortise this in. Now, the tricky part here is the piece is 3/4 of an inch wide, right? But because it's on an angle, the 3/4 is perpendicular to this rough angle here. So if I set this kind of like that there, the 3/4 of an inch is going to be kind of perpendicular off of that line that we haven't drawn in yet. So all I do when I mark this is I just kind of go at a rough angle to what I think this is going to be, right? And I just go right from that mark, and then I mark 3/4. And that'll give me a very close approximation for how wide that piece is. And trust me, it will be accurate enough, provided each side is the same, if I keep them at a similar angle. So now I have these ticks outside, right? One outside there and one outside of this vertical line here and here. Now, if I were to actually measure that, they're both roughly 3/8 of an inch off of that vertical line, right? Each way, 3/8, which would give you 3/4 between. Okay? Now, the trick here is the outside one, the one that's outside of the vertical line of the top piece. This one outside is what's going to come down and connect to this corner. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to line up with the outside mark that I have here, right? This outside mark, and I'm going to connect that up with this bottom corner, okay, right here. Now I already have the inside line marked up here. So I'm just going to come down here, sorry, and I'm just going to mark 3/4 of an inch to draw a parallel line, right? And now that I have that parallel line, I can come up to this one and I can connect down to that, which then I can draw that in, and that creates me my 3/4 of an inch side view leg. So now I'm just going to repeat that from this side. So I take the outside mark that I made, connect that down to the corner, right? And then I offset this by 3/4 of an inch. Oops, I'm going to do it a little bit lower here. Remember, it's a perpendicular 3/4. That's why my ruler is angled right here. And I make that mark. And then I measure to the inside piece. Okay. So I'm just fine tuning a little bit here. And then I can connect that down. All right, and there's my 2 vertical side pieces. Now, I see they're a little bit off here, right? So I'm just gonna double check, and I can actually see my dots here. This line here is a little bit on the inside of the dot, whereas my dot over here, which is right here, is a little bit on the outside of it. So I'm just gonna kind of double check this bottom here just to make sure it is accurate. This one looks a little wide, and that one looks a little narrow, right? They're both very close, but it's something very easy that we can fix. So I'm actually going to leave this one. It looks consistent. I'm just going to fix this one up a bit. So just with my eraser shield here, I'm just going to very quickly just kind of erase most of that line there. Okay, so just get a bit of the top there as well, just so I can kind of redraw in this line. So now I'm grabbing my straight edge again, set it up on my top point, and then I can bring that down and redraw in that line, which gives me something that now is definitely more consistent side to side. So you want to be accurate, you want to kind of fix this up as you go and make sure everything is as clean as possible. So now on each of these drawings, I have my top piece and my 3.5 inch legs, and I also have this horizontal part. So now what I want to do is I want to draw in these 2 horizontal pieces. So on our drawing here, we have a horizontal piece right here, and then we also in the end view have a horizontal piece right here that's going to extend through. And just to give you a view of what that looks like, that's why I drew these things here in SketchUp, just to give you that view. That's what that under piece looks like, right? It goes inside the legs right across. So in the end view, we would see most of that piece, right? And it's under that line. So the other tricky part about this is you can see in this view here, these legs angle in 2 directions, right? So in the front view, they look like they angle from the end, right? So in the front view, they angle from the end, but then also in the side view, they angle from the front, right? Which means if I'm looking at piece number 3 here, this piece number 3, we can see here has a width of 2.5 inches. But because the piece in the front view is actually tilted into the drawing, this is not going to be 2.5 inches, right? So I can't draw 2.5 inches in this view. Instead, I have to come over to this view to actually draw that height, which now I can follow the leg 2.5 inches, which will get me that true height, which if I look at the front view would look like a straight vertical line, right? But that would be the side of the hypotenuse of what the actual length is. So it would actually be a little less than 2.5 inches in this view, whereas in this view, I'm actually going to draw the 2.5 inches. So I'm going to do that right now. I set my ruler up, and from this center line that I have here, I'm going to mark up 2.5 inches following the leg, right? So I mark up 2.5 inches, and now I have that mark. I can now take this and draw it across this view because that's the actual height. And I'm also going to take this and draw a little bit of a line out there and a little bit of a line out here because that's going to be the top of that piece. So now I have it in the front view, and then I've also drawn it the perfect height, 2.5 inches in this side view. So now that leg also is 3/4 of an inch, is 3/4 of an inch thick, right? By 2.5. So now parallel to this leg, I want to mark off 3/4 of an inch. So to do parallel, guys, remember you need 2 lines to draw that line, because we don't have a straight edge that lines up with that. So I mark my 3.5 in 2 different places, or sorry, my 3/4 in 2 different places, and then I grab my straight edge and I can connect those 2 points. Okay. So I can connect that one down now, then I come over here, pencil on the point, and then I can connect that one down as well. So now I have this side rail basically, for the most part, drawn in both of these views. So I have them here and here, and I have it here. Which, just to give you context for those two, if I'm looking at this view, right, I have it drawn here, right here. Let it focus for a second, right? And then in the end view, which means I'm looking this way, I have this little parallelogram that's kind of drawn in here, which you would see right here. Okay, now I'm going to go and drop the piece below. Now the same thing, this piece below, this little brace piece that we saw up on the underside of it here, that's the same dimensions, right? So it's 3/4 by 2.5. But same thing, I can't measure down here 3/4 of an inch because the piece angles in this view. So what I want to do here now is I want to come to this side and measure down 2.5 inches. Right, so I have my mark there at 2.5 inches. So when I put that mark there, now I can come over here and I can actually now draw in that bottom brace on this side. This height won't be 2.5 inches, it'll be just under, right, because of the angle here. But now I have the 2.5 inches, I can draw a little line out there and a little line out here, right, on each side. That'll be 2.5 inches down. And now what I can do is offset the thickness of that piece, which is 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so put my 2 ticks at 3/4. Here. Got my ticks at 3/4 of an inch. Now I can grab my straight edge and I can connect those down. Okay, so now I have my 2 pieces. Again, I'm not happy with my straight edge ruler dimensions on these. They're slightly different. And looking at this, I can kind of see this one's a little bit narrower, but it kind of matches the 3/4 over here. So I'm actually going to adjust this one just a bit. I'll just come back and remark 3/4. Yeah, it was a little fat, a little wide. Right, so just adjust that a bit. And we can come in, set that mark, and just kind of redraw that. Okay, so that now fixes up my 3/4 piece there. And now I'm happier with that. That looks a little better on each side. Okay, so now basically I have all the components that I need for this except one final component, which is going to be my plywood gusset on the side here. So looking at this view here, you can see from the front view, there is a thickness of a piece of plywood that sits outside this leg. Right, this plywood here, looking at 0.6, is just going to be, oops, sorry, 1/2 inch plywood, right? And there also is a 1/2 inch plywood tray, which we'll draw on that hidden line in a minute. But for now, again, we're just worrying about object lines. We'll do hidden lines after. So 1/2 inch plywood for an end gusset. So this is pretty straightforward. Perpendicular to this leg, I'm just gonna put a piece of 1/2 inch plywood here. So I just mark off a 1/2 inch, come down here, mark off another 1/2 inch, and the same on this side. So remember, you see how my ruler is angled a bit? I'm following the perpendicular distance here because it's going to sit right on it, so it will be a perpendicular 1/2 inch value to that. Right? So I draw in my 1/2 inch marks. I bring in my straight edge, and this plywood is going to stop at the underside of the top piece. So when I'm drawing this, oops, right, I'm only drawing to the bottom piece of the gusset here, and then I'm stopping at the top piece because I don't need it any farther. Now come over to this side and draw in that same 1/2 inch line in the same place. That comes up to this and stops down at the bottom piece here. All right, so now I have basically all the lines that I need for these 2 views. So now I can actually start erasing and redrawing things in as they would be. So I'm going to start doing that. And when I erase this, I don't use an eraser shield at this step. I just kind of blindly go around and erase all the extra stuff, right? All the extra lines that I have. I start with the outside, get rid of my rectangle because I'm done with that. I don't need it anymore. And then you can also see up top here, I have a whole bunch of extra little dots and ticks and stuff. So I just give that a good erase. I can still see the line there, right? It's still there. I just got rid of all the extra stuff. So now when I go over that and darken it, it will just look like the objects that I want. And same thing here, you can see a little dot there. So I just come in and I just erase all those little extras, right? All the little dots I use to mark thicknesses and widths and all those marks. I get rid of them all. So what you should be left with is a rough outline of what the shape will actually be. Okay, so I'm going to do the same for this side. Get rid of all the extra little tiny stuff. Right. Oops. Yeah, I can always go back to after with my eraser shield and fine tune some of this, but like visible ones here, you guys can see this dot very clearly, right? That's a pencil dot when I marked the center line here, right? I definitely want to get rid of that because even drawing an object line over that isn't going to get rid of it. But now, when I erase that, you can see it's gone, right? And that's what I want. I want to get rid of all that extra stuff in the drawing, right? Any extra little dots that I made. So you're going to go through here and erase a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, all the little intersection points, all the extra little dots. Clean up your drawing. You might not get them all in the first go around here, but that's fine. We can just clean up and erase after. And next up, what I want to do here is I want to kind of figure out what's going to be hidden, because I'm actually going to erase those lines too. So when I redraw the shape in, I can draw in the hidden lines and then be finalized. The drawing would be finished. So I need to think what I'm not going to see. I'm going to start with this view right here. So looking at this view here, I can see that the legs go right up, right? And I didn't draw any hidden lines in here, but this bottom brace or the top piece here, the line would continue through. So I'm going to get rid of that line that I can't see right here, right? And that would be this line right here because the leg takes over that view. But I know it's going to be hidden, but I can fill that in after the fact. So I erase that hidden line there, and I do the same on this side. Okay? Now I think what else is hidden? I can look at this front view and I see that this brace is in the forefront. So everything behind that brace, like in the middle, like these leg lines, are all going to be gone. So in this view here, I got to get rid of the leg lines here. So I'm going to get rid of this inside line and this line because that gusset here is hidden behind this brace as well. So this side brace here goes all the way out to the plywood. So I got to get rid of both of the leg lines in there because I wouldn't see either of them. They would both be hidden views. So again, I just take a bit of time and patience here and just get rid of any of those extra lines that I'm not going to see. Okay? So again, I can still make out what I have here, right? I just know that this section right here would be filled in with a hidden line, and so would this little section right here. But I know where that is because I still have the line here and here, right? So when I go and draw that in, I come down, and then when I hit this horizontal line here, I start a dotted line, dotted line, dotted line until I get to here. And then I start the object line again because it's visible, right? So that's how we kind of fill that in. But right now I'm just getting rid of all the stuff that would be hidden. So in the front view, that's about it. It would just be these 2 vertical lines or 4 vertical lines on the legs and then the horizontal line on this piece up here. They would be gone from this view. They would be hidden. So now I'm going to switch to the end view. And in the end view here, you can see the entire end piece of the wood, which means the 2 little vertical lines coming up here inside, that would be a hidden line, and so with this inside one here, we would actually fully see the vertical line here, which you can't really make out right now, but it's the end of my piece, which actually meets roughly in that corner point right there. So I'm just going to take a quick second and just clean up those inside marks. Just erase what I can, just so I can still see what I'm doing, but I know when I darken all this in, this is going to look good. Now don't forget guys, I'm using a 2H for everything here, just so you can see what I'm drawing. So some of this may still be visible when I do my final product here, but you should be still at the 2H pencil for all of this work, right? You haven't done anything with a 4H yet. I'm sorry, you should be using a 4H for all this work. We've done nothing with a 2H yet. So we only are going to darken here in a second, but I got to figure out what's hidden. Now in this end view here, you can also see that that plywood gusset covers everything there, right? For the size of that gusset, everything is hidden inside of it. So looking at this view here, the plywood gusset goes right down to here, right down to these side brace pieces, which means the insides of these legs here and here would also be hidden. So I'm just going to take a quick second here and erase those. Right? You should still see the indent in the paper, so you should know where the line is. You're not erasing it entirely. You're just erasing it enough that when you go over this with your 2/8 pencil, you wouldn't see that. It would be hidden. Now down here on the bottom, same thing. If you look at this brace here, this brace here is in behind that leg. So any horizontal lines that are cutting through the leg here with this piece here, they would actually be hidden lines. Which means right here, you can see this little line right here, and then there's also a little line here, and there's a couple up there as well. I'm just going to clean those up because going through the leg, they would be hidden. They would be seen here, and then the finish point out here, which I haven't drawn in, and I'll show you that when I darken it, would also be hidden. But anything inside that leg would be a hidden line, right? But any of this would be visible. So just quickly, I just want to kind of get in the middle there and just erase that little tiny line that's there. Now, if you need to, you can definitely use your eraser shield at this point, just to help you not erase any object lines if you choose not to, okay? So I think there I'm pretty well good to go to start darkening this. So again, now at this stage here, I'm gonna grab my 2/8 pencil and start going over this and drawing. Now I like to do this sequentially. I do this horizontal lines, and then I do vertical lines, and then I do angled lines, just to try and make sure I'm not missing any. And also as I'm going, I'm being conscious of what's hidden and what's not. Okay, so I'm gonna start right down here on the feet. And this is obviously just an object line, so I darken in both of those. And while I'm lined up, I'm also gonna come over and darken the bottoms of these. Right, because the bottoms of these feet are gonna be the same level as these feet, and they're all gonna be darkened. Right, that's why I start with horizontal and do every horizontal line here. Then I slide up to this bottom rail piece, and I'm going to darken these little sections here. And then I'm going to darken this section here. That would be visible. So I've darkened these little tiny bits here, and then of course I've darkened this line here, making sure not to go inside here or here, because those are hidden lines. But I just pulled away. Normally I would do those right now as well. And I am going to do them, right? I just wanted to pull away just to show you that this little section right here would be a hidden line. And to make that visibly hidden, because it's a small area, what I do is I kind of go in just behind halfway and I make little tiny ticks, right? Which don't complete the whole view. And then even from a distance, you should be able to see there's little gaps in here, which indicate hidden. And if we were to zoom in on that, you would see it a little bit clearer, but because that leg's so narrow, it is kind of hard to see the hidden line, but it is hidden because it's behind the leg, okay? So now I just keep going, I move up, and I do this rail on this side. Now remember, on the front view here, that rail is gonna be right across. So that is the object line, straight across. Both of these lines are visible, right? So I'm gonna make sure I draw those right across. So I'll start with the bottom one here. I'll go right across with my object line, making sure to rotate your pencil as you draw. And then over here, I'm just gonna also complete in this here. But now looking at this end view, you see where this bottom line is right now. This is actually gonna be right across here as well, because not only is it the end pieces here, but it's also the bottom of my plywood gusset, right? So that would be drawn straight across as well. Okay, now I'm going to come up and do the top piece. Now this one, same thing, is right across. So right out to the plywood on the gussets there, right across. And then over here, it would actually just be the tops of those side pieces, right? So just the top here and just the top here, okay? Because there is no line or piece here. This piece is installed along the side piece. So on the end view, it goes straight down through that piece, right? So now I've darkened the tops of all those. And now I'm just gonna continue. I'm gonna go right up to my very top piece. I'll start with this view here. Now remember, it is all solid except in between the legs, because the legs are installed on the face of that. So you wouldn't see the line of the top piece here. That's why we draw it with the hidden. And I do this all in one shot. So I line up my straight edge, I go right out to the outside, I draw an object line, and then I continue inside that with the hidden line. Then I continue the object line to the leg again, and then I continue with the hidden line, and then I continue out to the outside with an object line. So when I'm done that, I have my object line, hidden line, object line, hidden line, object line. Okay, and then this side here will actually be just a full object line right out to the legs. Okay, so over here I can just finalize that line in there. Okay, notice I'm stopping at the sides of the legs because that is 3.5 inches. It doesn't protrude into the legs at all there. So now I can draw in the entire top. So for the top, it's just all solid object. It just goes from one side right to the other, because it is the top of the Sawhorse. And I can do the same on this side, right out to the outside of the legs, because it's the same thing. It goes right across the top. So that's going to include the 3.5 inches plus that 3/8 overhang that we have on the top view. Okay, so that completes all of my horizontal lines. Now I'm going to grab my square. I'm going to do in any vertical lines. Not many of them in this drawing because there's a lot of angles, but the first one is the top end piece right here. So I'm just going to start right here. I draw in my vertical line, and then there's nothing else in this view that's straight. So I come right over to the end view here, and I draw in that vertical line. Now, same thing in this view, there isn't much that's vertical except this top piece that would be visible. So I'm going to draw this in here, straight line down, and then come over here and another straight line down. Now, because both of these are straight down here, you would see the whole entire top piece, right? You would see this whole box that's 1.5 by 3.5 inches. That's why I drew these vertical as solid lines. And these legs are going to extend as object lines right up to, not to the corner of the box, they're actually going to extend just outside the box, which is why it looks a little odd right now, because there's an extra little line that sticks out beyond my 3.5 inch box. Because remember, this leg is mortised in half the 3/4 of an inch, which means it sticks out about the same 3/8 of an inch on the outside of the piece. So that'll look better when we fill it in. So why don't we start doing that now? This is where I start doing all of my diagonal lines. Okay, I'm going to start on the side view here. No particular reason, it's just where I am. So again, I'm going to start on the top here, and this outside leg is a solid line right down the whole piece. All right, so I just connect to my outside point there, and I just draw that object line right down. Now you can see it looks like I've got a really weird thick line there because I wasn't lined up where I needed to be. So because of that, I'm going to take a quick second. I'm just going to erase that entirely. I'm not happy with that at all. So I'm going to take a second, erase that. I'm going to try and fix that. Okay. So now lined up with my outside edge, and find my point. And then when I'm happy, I can draw that line down. And there, I'm much more happy with that. And then I can do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so I'll draw that line down. Same thing, I'm off on this side too. Oh, not having a good time with this today, but that's okay. So I'm just going to erase most of that line and try and redraw that in as well. Just not happy with where that fell. Okay, there we go. That looks a little better. So now I've got the outsides of my legs drawn. Now I'm going to draw the insides of the legs. But remember, the inside of the legs are actually a hidden line, right from the top here, a hidden line all the way down to the bottom of the plywood, right, which is right here. Because that gusset on the end is covering that whole leg, so the inside line of the leg would be hidden. Okay, so the leg goes right up to the top and right down to the bottom corner. But this first half is all going to be hidden. So I do a series of dashed lines to indicate that that is hidden. And then once I get to this point here, that's where that object line will come in. So right at the bottom of that plywood. All right, so it'd be an object line below, but all hidden up above. So same thing from this side. I line up that point there and that point there. And then I start, and this first section is all hidden lines because it's hidden behind the plywood gusset. And then once I reach that bottom of the gusset, then it would be a solid line right to the bottom. Okay. Now as I'm noticing here, I just got to touch up this bottom line over here. I seemed to erase it when I last did my racing, so I'm just going to fix that up. And now you can see that I have my hidden lines behind the gusset here, and then straight down on the sides. Okay. The paper's a little wavy. It looks funny, but it is pretty accurate here in person. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm going to go out and I'm actually going to connect in and finish up this object line here. Right, so I solid that one in there, and I do the same for this side here. Just from previous erasing, I did erase some of this, so I'm just going to redraw in that line and then redraw in these as well, just to kind of finalize that little view there. And now on this view, there's only one line left to do, and that is going to be a line that connects from here down to this edge piece here, because it's this line right here. For this under brace, it connects to the outside of the side brace, right? Or the front view brace, and it connects down to the bottom here. Just to get you a visual of that here, you can kind of see it here, right? This piece connects here up to the side brace. You're going to have that line that's going to be visible, and that's what this line here represents. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. So again, I connect from that down to that point there. Okay, and then I'm good. And I'm just going to actually redraw in some of my hidden lines down here as well, because they kind of got erased in me fixing up some lines. So now I've redrawn in the hidden lines for that brace down below here. And that view there is complete, right? I've got all my hidden lines in there, except my plywood line, but I'm going to do that one in a little bit here because it's just one line that we do, and it's quick and easy, okay? So now I'm going to go up and finish up some angled lines in this view. Now remembering what's visible, the only ones that are hidden here are going to be this leg line and this leg line, because this side rail here is the object line in full view. This is hidden, but the rest of these leg lines are all object lines. Right? So I'm going to start up top. And I draw object lines straight down to here. And then I do a little hidden line. And then I continue object down to the bottom corner. Again, I'm not liking how this is working out. That is a double thick line right there. For some reason, this is part of the problem of doing everything with a 2H pencil. You'll never get the accuracy and consistency you want just because it doesn't erase fully. And if you can't line things up perfectly, it really shows. Okay? So you always got to start with your 4H and then do it with the 2H after. All right, so I'm just going to redraw in that line, and then I'm going to come out and do the 1/2-inch plywood gusset line right now as well. Okay, so that goes and stops right there. And then same thing, I'm going to do the leg inside here. Right, so starting from there, it's going to be an object line right down to the side rail, a hidden line inside the side rail, and then an object line right down to the bottom. Okay, so that does up that leg. Now I can jump over and do this leg. So I'm going to start with the outside line of the leg, object line straight down, hidden line behind the rail, and then object line straight down to the bottom, and do the same thing for the inside of the leg. Object line straight down, hidden line inside behind the rail, and then straight down. And then I just got to do the plywood gusset on the outside. So from here, draw that straight down. Okay, and then just two little quick lines here for those braces underneath. And that should complete that view, except our 1/2-inch plywood. the tray inside. So just to show you this here, we have this line, all this shading in here, which is number 5, and that's just a 1/2 inch plywood tray, right? And this plywood tray, you can see under here, it finishes flush with this side rail and also flush with the plywood. So basically all we have to do is measure up a 1/2 inch on both of these views, and there's the plywood. So with my 1.5 inch scale, I'm going to measure up a 1/2 inch, and then with that 1/2 inch right from the plywood, I'm going to draw a hidden line right across this side rail, because it will be the plywood tray that fits completely inside this Sawhorse. And I draw this right out to the plywood gusset. Right? And then I do the same plywood tray in this view that it's completely hidden. Right? It's going to fill out the whole inside of this box. Okay? And that's going to go right out to the side rail here as well. So now I have the 1/2 inch plywood tray drawn here and here on both views. So now these two drawings are complete. So next up, we're going to start to transfer up things into our top drawing. This was going to be the confusing one. I'm going to have to switch angles and views and all kinds of things to try and get us to visualize this and see it and finish it, because it is the complicated part. These two parts were easy.